Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to North Dakota Today and back to another Ask an Attorney segment with Mike Kuna here from Kuna Law Firm PLLC. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Jillian.
All right, so this week's question is, Dear Mr. Kuna, I watch your show weekly and really enjoy your short and to-the-point explanations of the law. As a woman born in the United States and the freedoms we have today, I'm really intrigued to find out what was the legal framework that allowed slavery. I also read in the Bible that Jewish people were slaves in Egypt and was wondering what was the legal framework that was used to enslave them. Thank you for your response.
Wow, that's a lot of questions in one question. Okay, I'll start from the beginning. Thank you for your compliment. And I wish to emphasize here that slavery is a horrible institution that violated and ruined the lives of hundreds of millions of people throughout history. And luckily for us, we live in an age where it does no longer exist, at least in this part of the world, and we should truly appreciate it because of the horrible effects slavery had over the lives of so many people throughout history. When we start speaking about slavery, especially in ancient Egypt, it was not really codified into the law. We have to remember that ancient Egypt is an ancient empire that predates Rome by a few thousand years. Egypt itself did not have codified laws, but they did have a case-by-case basis, and slavery did exist in ancient Egypt. Slavery in ancient Egypt was due to many causes. Some of them were slave trade, some were the fact that Egypt conquered other nations and took away slaves from those nations, and some even through piracy. Also in ancient Egypt, there were situations when people got into debt, and due to that debt, they became slaves. However, again, it was more on a case-by-case basis and more localized as a practice by the religious clergy, priests at the time, as well as local government officials. If we continue in history and go to ancient Rome, their slavery was very much codified, and we still have a lot of records from that time. However, just like in ancient Egypt, slaves had absolutely no rights. They were nothing more than property, economic property, and they were not having any privileges of Roman laws. Instead, they were subjugated by force, and on top of it, were not treated as people, but instead, again, as property. In Rome, a slave, just like property, was bought and sold and even inherited. However, although in Egypt, rarely slaves were ever freed, except for one case in the Bible of a whole bunch of Jewish people that were helped by God, although my people were able to escape Egypt, in Rome there was actually a legal foundation for the freedom of slaves if their so-called owners, and I feel very uncomfortable saying that word, freed them. And if we go again to the future, to the Ottoman Empire that existed afterwards, we actually had a whole different legal framework, Sharia law, Islamic law, that actually was more lenient on slaves because it defended them from certain forms of abuse, and it allowed them the right to become free on their own accord through time or through purchasing their freedom. And yes, it sounds that horrible, actually purchasing their freedom. Now, if we go again to the future, we need to look at the 13 original colonies in the US before it was the United States. Well, there were only colonies. The colonies didn't have one singular law for all the colonies, but they had multiple laws for each colony. Back in the day, we did not organize them or call them in a certain way. Today we do. We call them the slave codes. And what it meant is that back in that time, when slaves were purchased from Africa and had to survive the journey to the US, upon arrival, they again had no rights. They were treated not as people, they were treated as property. Also, the more they wanted to revolt, the more the slave codes became worse and worse for them. And if you look at those slave codes, you can see that the main purpose of them is to basically both deny a revolt and to keep those people in shackles and enslaved forever. And whether it was a law that forbid them from getting an education, or whether it was a law that forbid them from having arms or even assembly, black people were treated very badly upon arrival. And on top of it, becoming free became significantly harder with time, because if initially there were options for black people to become free, then with time they became worse and worse. And also we have to remember that whether a black person was a slave or a free person in the northern states, still a lot of these laws applied, because, for example, a black person in New York could not testify against a white person. I believe that is the shortest summary I can give on this very long subject.
Yeah, and it's absolutely horrifying subject, honestly, but
Yeah.
the way that you explain it and the extensive knowledge that you have of just history in general is astonishing, and
Thank you.
it's an amazing opportunity to have you come on and make the correlation between history and law. So thank you. Yes, of course. If you'd like to ask a legal question, you can visit our website at valleynewslive.com and click on the Ask an Attorney tab. We have lots more North Dakota Today coming up right after the break.